Shen Jie, as an excellent gold medal female bodyguard, died during a mission. When she opened her eyes again, she found that she was actually wearing a little pitiful creature from the 1970s, whose father didn't care and who was being bullied by her stepmother and stepsister. What's even more explosive is that she was just about to be sent to the ugly and old man's bed by her good stepsister, who was using dirty little tricks. Looking at the locked door, she couldn't get out, but the handsome military brother with 8 abdominal muscles in front of her made her feel that if something really happened, she wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Shen Yan, who has been reborn for a lifetime, designed to let her stepsister spend a good night with another man the day before her blind date with the future richest man in order to seize her position as the stepsister's richest woman. Years later, Shen Yan, who worked 3 jobs a day to support a man and 3 stepsons and stepdaughters, not only did she not expect the man she married to become the richest man, but her stepsister not only married into a high-gate courtyard, but also hugged him 2 times a year. The man made great achievements year by year and became the true wife of the chief. Chapter 1. Coming to catch the traitor. You are listening at novel full.audio. Shen Jie was awakened by a large hand taking off her clothes. She remembers that she was shot in the heart while protecting an important figure in the country. Because it was the location of her heart, the pain was a momentary event, and at that time, her eyes were black and she didn't know anything about the pain. She quickly reached out and touched the position of her heart, but it was beating. Did she not die? Soon, her attention was once again drawn to the large hand still taking off her clothes. Opening her eyes, she immediately met a pair of deep black eyes. The man in front of her had a tall nose bridge, thin lips that were as sexy and charming as a knife cut, and her facial features were even closer to perfection. Wait. Is he taking off her clothes? Dang Tuzi. Rogue. These words flashed into her mind, and her gaze instantly became several degrees cold. She clenched her powerful fist and swung it towards the man who was still touching her, cursing at the same time, hooligan. Looking for death. Rong Chi's face remained unchanged as he dodged the punch she swung, stood up and took 2 steps back. He looked at her coldly and said, "How do you feel now? You're dressed, don't worry, nothing happened to us, you don't have to worry," he kindly reminded. After listening to his words, Shen Jie twisted her eyebrows. At this moment, her brain hurt and memories that didn't belong to her flooded out of her mind. She actually traveled through time and wore it onto someone with the same name and surname as her in the 1970s. However, her original body was weak, without a mother since childhood. Her father married a stepmother and then had a stepsister, who has been bullying her ever since. Today's play was also done by the original stepsister, and the purpose is currently unknown. She also knew that this man was not trying to do anything to her just now, but was actually trying to do something to him. At the thought of the scene where her original body almost made her stronger, Shen Jie unconsciously blushed. "I'm sorry, I remember everything. I offended you just now, I didn't mean to. Please believe me, I can compensate you. If you have any conditions, feel free to mention them." After all, the original person almost made them stronger. At this moment, the door was forcefully pushed open outside, and a large group of people burst into the room in a frenzy. Oh my God, such shameless behavior. It's really embarrassing to keep the door closed and do such shameless things in broad daylight. The woman's angry curses echoed in the crowd. "Xiao Jie, how could you do such a thing? Our family's face is going to be ruined by you." At this moment, a woman with a melon seed face walked out of the crowd, looking as if she was 18 or 19 years old on the right. This look in her eyes revealed that she was a woman with a lot of cunning. Shen Jie quickly found the identity of this woman in her memory, which was the good stepsister of the original owner. "I can't believe that this little Jie usually looks weak and timid, but when she dares to do such shameless things, she really doesn't want appearances," someone whispered in the crowd. Listening to the villagers around her accusing her of being a good sister, Shen Man lowered her head and lightly hooked the corners of her mouth. When he looked up, His face showed a sad expression and he said to the villagers pointing at Shen Jie, "Hey folks, don't blame Shen Jie anymore. She did such shameless things because our family didn't manage her well." The villagers saw her apologizing for Shen Jie, and many people praised her, saying, "Although this little man is not Shen Laosan's biological daughter, he is good to Shen Jie as his stepsister." Chapter 2. Unload your hands. You are listening at novel.Full.audio. Shen Man couldn't help but curl his lips and immediately walked over to pull Shen Jie, who was sitting on the bed. He said at the same time, "Shen Jie, hurry up and apologize to the villagers for doing such shameless things for you. Do you hear me?" At this moment, Shen Jie, who was originally planning to sit in bed and watch a children's play for a while, caught the evil hand extending towards her arm and stood up sharply. With her eyes narrowed, she raised her hand and accurately grasped it. The next second, she directly removed this arm. A crisp, click sound was heard by anyone present who was not deaf. Shen Man was taken aback for a moment, then a heart-wrenching pain from her arm twisted her face and screamed, "My arm, my hand, it's broken, it's broken." She tried to lift her arm, and this movement made her forehead sweat in pain. "Shen Jie, what did you do to my hand? Why can't it move anymore?" Shen Man looked at her with a grim expression and asked. Shen Jie sneered, "Don't worry, it can't be stopped. It's just to make your mouth clearer. If you talk nonsense to me again, next time it won't be as simple as taking off your arm, that's just taking off your head. If you don't believe it, just give it a try." "You." Shen Man was scared by the malice on her face and dared not speak. "This is really a ghost." Shen Jie, who usually allows her to bully, seems to have changed a person today, like a demon king from hell. At this moment, her gaze turned to the man standing behind Shen Jie, and she wanted to see what kind of ugly man Shen Wei had helped find. The thought of Shen Jie being mistreated by an old and ugly man just now made the pain in her arm seem insignificant. "Xiao Jie, who is the man behind you? Let's take a look, big guy." As soon as she thought it would be an old and ugly man, the pain in her hand was nothing at all. Shen Jie looked at the disgusting smile on the corner of her mouth, pulled it down, and stood aside, revealing the true face of the man hidden behind her. "Isn't this the boss who followed Shen Qing's family over here? How could he appear here? God, it's really Shen Qing's boss. I heard his mother's mother said that he was from Beijing, and his parents ate public food." Shen Man's proud expression turned pale when he heard the discussion around him. He rubbed his eyes twice with his hands in disbelief. When he looked back, the man in front of him was not an old and ugly man. He was clearly good-looking and had a masculine aura. Shen Man's face was taken aback, and he cursed Shen Wei, who helped her with things, several times in his heart. This guy, who was not successful enough and had more than enough failures, asked him to find an old man for Shen Jie, but fortunately, he found such a beautiful man, who was also the master from Beijing. After being watched by everyone for a while, Rong Qi finally lifted a pair of cold eyes and swept towards the followers. His low voice interrupted everyone's gossip. "Everyone, Comrade Shen Jie and I are not doing anything promiscuous here. In fact, it is me and Comrade Shen Jie who are talking about each other. We are meeting on a normal date." As soon as he finished his sentence, the villagers burst into flames. Shen Jie blinked at him desperately, but the man seemed to have not seen her, just looking at her with a soft smile on his lips. Shen Man on the side watched their affectionate interaction, almost biting a few rows of teeth in his mouth with jealousy. Why is it that whether in the past or present life, Shen Jie's fate is so good? Finally, it was not easy for Shen Wei, who had always been secretly in love with her, to find an ugly man to defile her. However, that useless person actually found this said to be a big shot from the capital. Who talked to you about a partner in Chapter 3? You are listening at novel.Full.audio. If you have nothing to do, you can go back first. Comrade Shen Jie and I still have something to say. Please do me a favor, he said to the villagers present with a polite and distant smile. The villagers saw that he was polite and a big shot from Beijing, so they naturally didn't want to offend him. In addition, they believed Shen Man's words about what kind of promiscuous things Shen Jie was doing with men here. As a result, both of them were dressed well, and it didn't seem like they were doing that kind of thing. Quickly, the villagers left the house one by one with embarrassment. In the end, there were only 3 people left in the huge house. Rong Qi looked at Shen Man, who had not left, with a cold and gloomy gaze, and asked coldly, "Why, does this comrade want to see me talking to comrade Shen Jie here?" Shen Man was scared by his cold gaze and wanted to run away, but the thought of such a good man being snatched away by Shen Jie made him feel unwilling. In the end, he had to endure his inner fear and bite his lips to speak to him. "Comrade Rong, hello. I am Shen Jie's sister, and you may not understand my sister. She is a fickle woman, and you may not know that she has hidden something from you. She has a blind date, and you must not know if this is right or wrong." Shen Jie looked coldly at her who had slandered her, and then stepped forward to remove her other hand as well. "Shen Jie, what did you do to my other hand?" Shen Man looked at her with a frightened expression as she couldn't move her other hand anymore. "I didn't do anything, it just made your mouth long and memorable," she replied with a nonchalant smile. Shen Man glared at her with a twisted expression of anger, as if he wished he had eaten her blood. Shen Jie calmly welcomed her malicious gaze and coldly reminded her, "Just a reminder, if you still want these 2 hands, I suggest you go to the village doctor to get them connected as soon as possible. Otherwise, if it takes too long, any sequelae will have nothing to do with me." Shen Man's face turned pale with fear. She was not born again to waste her hands. "Shen Jie, wait for me, I won't just forget about it." She let go of this harsh sentence and ran out of the room with her 2 shaky hands struggling. Shen Jie looked at her disheveled figure as she left, and a cold smile curved around her lips. At this moment, a strong gaze fell on her, making it difficult for her to ignore. "Have you seen enough?" She turned her head to look at the handsome man standing behind her with a displeased expression. This guy has a pretty face and doesn't know what to say or what not to say. He didn't know that the words he just said to the village were in this era, but they could make her drown in the saliva of these people. "Are you angry? Why are you angry?" Rong Qi looked at her with an appreciative light in his eyes. Shen Jie rolled her eyes in silence when she heard his question, "Why am I angry?" "You really don't know anything." "I don't know, I just helped you, didn't I?" "You should have thanked me," he asked still without understanding. Shen Jie looked at his deep ink eyes and finally understood that he really didn't know why she was angry. "You just told the villagers that we were talking about a partner. Have you ever thought about the consequences of what you said to me?" She walked up and poked his chest, questioning. He thought for a while this time. "Can you think of a better way to solve the fact that we are here at that time?" he looked at her and asked. Shen Jie was speechless when asked this question, because she really couldn't come up with the best way to solve this matter. Is this my own in Chapter 4? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rong Qi saw her not speaking and curled her pretty lips, "So my solution is the only best solution right now. Besides, what I just said was serious. Let's talk about a partner." Shen Jie was startled by his words and took a step back to look at him, asking, "Big brother, I remember it seems like we're meeting for the first time. Do you often talk to female comrades you've met for the first time?" Rong Qi immediately answered seriously, "I'm not such a casual person. You were the first person I said this when I was 26 years old." Seeing her staring at him with guarded eyes, he immediately continued to speak in displeasure, "Do you want to be irresponsible to me?" Shen Jie was almost shocked by the sudden cardiac arrest, and quickly swallowed saliva to stop him. "Wait a minute, what you just said, I'm responsible for you, what we didn't do anything good, our clothes are good, don't think I don't know anything without talking about the object." Rong Qi's face turned black and he pointed to his lips, "Didn't you do this too?" Shen Jie just realized that his lips seemed a bit redder, swollen, and even sexier than those of ordinary people. Thinking of this, she quickly shook her head, wanting to shake the word sexy out of her mind. Are you saying this was done by me? Kiss. She said as she touched her lips. She hadn't felt much before, but now when he mentions it, her lips do seem a bit numb. I don't have the bad habit of biting my own lips, he said with a smile on his face. Shen Jie's face turned red as she tried to find a legitimate reason for herself and loudly told him, speaking of this, I, as a girl, should also suffer losses. You, as a big man, haven't suffered any losses. Why didn't I lose out? This is mine. He stopped the conversation in time. Shen Jie stared at his suddenly red handsome face with a puzzled expression, feeling strange. She then looked at his strange red face, and suddenly a bold idea flashed through her mind. Don't tell me that kiss just now was your first time. She covered her mouth and looked at him in surprise. Rong Qi's face turned even redder, and he finally spoke with a hint of embarrassment and anger. Anyway, I will be responsible to you, and I will marry you. After saying these words, he walked out from here with a red face. Shen Jie chased out to tell him that she didn't need him to take responsibility, but when she ran out, the man had already run away. Looking at this rudimentary house, Shen Jie sighed. What kind of time travel is this? Even in the 1970s, when people were eating and drinking less, this identity was still a pitiful person that she couldn't accept. She didn't mean to go back, but she thought she was hit in the heart at the time, so she probably died before crossing here. So, the possibility of wearing it back is almost zero. According to her original memory, Shen Jie returned to the Shen family and went directly to the room where she had lived before. Speaking of a room, it is actually a small room in the Shen family's miscellaneous room. Inside, there is a simple bed that is half a meter in size, and the rest of the room is surrounded by the Shen family's agricultural tools and some food. Looking at this small and pitiful room, Shen Jie clenched her fist and realized that it was simply not a place for people to live. At this moment, a sharp woman's curse sounded outside, "Bitch, you die for me. You stink and shameless. You can just flirt with men outside and hurt my manner. Are you tired of living and dying for me?" Chapter 5. Don't worry, I won't die. You are listening at novel.full.audio. Shen Jie, who was holding back a lot of anger, heard the scolding outside and immediately remembered the other person's identity in her mind. It turns out that she is a good stepmother in her current identity. She is worried that there is no place to vent her anger in her stomach. Quickly, she found a weighing stick in a corner and walked out with it holding her head and chest high. In the yard, a woman in her 40s stood with her hands on her waist and cursed loudly, "Damn you, haven't you been itching for a few days? Have you scolded enough?" Shen Jie appeared behind her with a calm face and asked coldly. Shui Guifan was suddenly startled by the sound behind her, and her curses abruptly came to an end. After seeing clearly who the owner of the voice behind her was, her sharp and sarcastic face immediately showed a cannibalistic expression, cursing, "Stinky and shameless. It's okay to steal a man outside and even hurt my daughter. I think you're tired of it, aren't you? Are you looking for a fight?" She then came forward and pinched someone's arm. The pain in her arms immediately made Shen Jie, who had always disliked losses, pick up the tools in her hand and rudely hit the most painful part of her body. Shui Guifan let out a scream and looked at her with a frightened expression as she hugged her belly. "You, what have you done to me? Why is my stomach so painful?" Shen Jie looked coldly at her painful expression and said coldly, "Don't worry, you can't die. As long as you don't provoke me, you can naturally live well." "You." Shui Guifan looked at her with widened pupils. How did she feel like this slut had changed? She used to let her beat and scold, but today, this slut actually fought back against her. Shen Jie knew that her sudden transformation would inevitably make people familiar with her original identity suspect, so she decided to take the initiative to find a reason to explain, do you think I feel like a different person? Before, I didn't want to argue with your mother and daughter, but you bullied me too much. Your daughter also wanted to destroy me. Do you really think I was made of clay and let you bully me? Let me tell you, I won't be bullied by you like before. If you dare to beat and scold me again, even if I take out my life, I will die with you. If you don't believe me, you can come and try. As she finished speaking, she scanned around and finally found a discarded half-brick in the corner of the wall. Shui Guifan watched with fear as she picked up half a brick from the corner of the wall and slowly walked towards her. You, what do you want to do? I'll tell you, although I'm not your biological mother, I'm also your stepmother. If you dare to hit me, be careful not to be struck by lightning. Shui Guifan looked at her approaching figure with wide eyes, trembling with fear. Shen Jie looked at her trembling rows of teeth, and a disdainful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. It turned out to be a nest of bullying and fear of the heart. If her original body dared to resist, she probably wouldn't have the chance to wear it here. I see it clearly. If you two provoke me again, you will end up like this half-brick. After speaking, she raised her hand and smashed the half-brick with her bare hands. Shui Guifan looked at the broken debris on the ground with a frightened expression on her face. When she saw her looking towards her, she quickly lowered her head and dared not look at her. Seeing that her goal had been achieved, Shen Jie turned around with a satisfied expression and entered the miscellaneous room again. At this moment, she lifted the back of her hand that had just been chopping bricks and looked at it. Surprisingly, the back of her hand turned red. It seems that her original body is still too weak. If it were for her in the past, not to mention chopping bricks, even if it's chopping steel bars, she could still bend it without any pain in her hands. Chapter 6. The boss goes angry. You are listening at novel full.audio. At this moment, a gurgling sound came from her stomach. She reached out and touched her groaning stomach, and through her own memory, she realized that her body ate less than chickens every day and did more work than cows. After calculation, the original body has not eaten anything since last night, no wonder their stomach is so hungry. Firstly, she rejected the idea of getting food from this family. This family is also poor and has nothing to eat. Secondly, even if there is a little food to eat, it is difficult to find the good stepmother who was originally hiding it. So she plans to be self-sufficient is the best way. According to her original memory, she remembered a pond behind the mountain behind the village. When she went there to catch pigs and grass, she saw fish floating out of the water. After locking in this place, she immediately walked out of the room and found Shui Guifan not at home while searching for convenient tools in the yard. However, she didn't take these trivial matters to heart. After seeing that she couldn't find a suitable tool to handle in this house, she walked up the mountain alone with a firewood knife. This time entering the mountain, she had to once again marvel at the poor health of her original body. If the mountain in front of her had been replaced by the old one, she could have walked all of it in 20 minutes. But now, it took her an hour to walk to the pond behind the mountain. And when she arrived here, not only was she gasping for breath, but she also felt dizzy and at any time there was a danger of falling unconscious here. Shen Jie sat quietly on the ground for half an hour, until she was certain that her discomfort had disappeared. Then she started searching around with a firewood knife for tools to play with the fish. In her past life, besides being a top bodyguard, she also had a special interest in researching weapons and the like. It can be said that she studied almost all the weapons in the world. At that time, she had already planned that if she didn't become a bodyguard, she would join the domestic weapons research library. Unfortunately, she hadn't had time to fulfill this wish, so she came here wearing it. I searched for about 10 minutes, but due to limited resources here, I only found a few materials suitable for making fish-catching weapons. Looking at these things, she quickly had a weapon suitable for catching fish in her mind. As she said it, she squatted on the ground and started playing with them. At the same time, Rong Qi, hidden in the dense forest, stared with interest at the busy little figure in the distance. Interesting. He lived for over 20 years, and it was the first time he had met such an interesting woman. Isn't that Shen Jie? Why is she here? Also, what is she doing? Shen Qing looked at Shen Jie squatting on a wooden stick in the distance with a surprised expression. Didn't you tell me before that comrade Shen Jie was a pitiful person who was bullied by his stepmother and stepsister? I don't think so. He looked at the figure in the distance with a proud and distant smile on his lips. Shen Qing glanced at his boss and scratched his head. Boss, I haven't come back for years. Before I joined the army, Shen Jie was indeed bullied by her stepmother and stepsister every day. I've seen her cry a few times. Rong Qi's eyes immediately showed a chill. It's just a pair of inexperienced mother and daughter. Shen Qing looked at the suddenly changing boss in front of him, who looked like a stranger, and instinctively swallowed in fear. How could he feel like Shui Guifan and her daughter were going to suffer a big loss? At this moment, a strange look flashed in Rong Qi's eyes, and the corner of his lips slightly raised. It's interesting. I never thought there was such an interesting person hidden in your small village, he said. Chapter 7. Interesting Women. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the distance, Shen Jie, who was making fishing tools, suddenly felt something unusual behind her. She turned her head and looked around, and her intuition told her that there were two lines of sight staring at her just now. Behind a big tree, Shen Qing tried his best to lower his anger and looked at his boss, saying, Boss, it was just a close call. If you hadn't pulled me a little, I would have noticed by Shen Jie now. She's become so powerful now, as if she knew we were peeking at her. Rong Qi's lips slowly curved, and his dark eyes were filled with a glow of interest. That's why I said there's such an interesting woman in your small village who can cure my old problems. After hearing his words, Shen Qing immediately widened his eyes and said, Head, do you mean that when Shen Jie touched you, your whole body stopped itching? At this moment, Rong Qi felt as if the woman in the distance had noticed their side and was constantly looking towards them. Shut up. Seeing that their position was about to be discovered by her, Rong Qi, who wanted to peek again, politely kicked Shen Qing's calf. Shen Qingtong's pupils widened and his mouth opened wide. The next second, his mouth was covered by a big hand, and all of his shouting went into his own stomach. Make such a fuss again, and after returning to the team, go back to training 10 laps a day on the playground. His eyes were a bit creepy and he threatened. Upon hearing that he had to run 10 laps on the playground every day, Shen Qing shook his head in fear and looked at him with pitiful eyes. Rong Qi, covered in a cold, released his mouth. At the same time, standing by the edge of the fish pond, Shen Jie, swinging a simple harpoon, occasionally looked behind her. Just now, she clearly felt two lines of sight staring towards her, but when she looked over, those two lines of sight disappeared again, which was too strange. At this moment, the harpoon she threw out suddenly moved. It turned out that the simple harpoon she made was piercing a 2-pound grass carp. As she watched the bloodshed rendering in the lake, she hooked her mouth and immediately put away the ting rope in her hand. The next second, the struggling grass carp was thrown from the water to the shore. She can eat this raw fish even if she is hungry now. In order to fill her stomach as soon as possible, she chose the fastest and simplest barbecue method, directly inserting a stick into the fish's belly and then grilling it on the cooked fire. Her seamless grilled fish action shocked the hearts of the two men who were peeking not far away. Those of them who have experienced outdoor combat outside dare not say that they have the speed of her just grilled fish. Head, she can compare her grilled fish movements to yours just now. You are the fastest and best in our group. I didn't expect you to be surpassed by a woman now. Shen Qing looked at him with a surprised expression like a country bumpkin and shouted. Rong Qi glanced at him with a cold expression and said coldly, You can't speak, no one will treat you as mute. Shen Qing looked at the angry boss and was so scared that he quickly made a zipper pull in front of his mouth. It's interesting, you can go back first, don't wait for me. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked out from behind the tree. Immersed in finally having something to fill her stomach, Shen Jie suddenly felt movement coming from behind. She immediately picked up the harpoon placed on her right side and calmly turned her head. "Comrade Shen, we're meeting again." Rong Qi glanced at the harpoon she was holding tightly in her hand. He was sure that if he didn't make a sound in time, the harpoon in her hand would fly towards him. Chapter 8. Pleasing her. You are listening at novel.Audio. Seeing him, Shen Jie put down the harpoon in her hand and ignored him. She turned around and took the roasted fish off the fire. Smelling the burnt grilled fish, she instinctively swallowed her saliva. In the past, she wouldn't even glance at this kind of grilled fish, but now, in this era of not having enough to eat and not being warm, eating meat is a luxury, and now this fish is also considered a precious item. After swallowing her saliva, she immediately used 2 pre-made simple chopsticks to pick up a piece of fish with belt meat and put it in her mouth. Although it was not salty or tasteless, it still made her want to eat it in big gulps. The next second, she threw down the 2 simple chopsticks in her hand and grabbed the fish with her hand, starting to eat it in large bites. Seeing her ignoring him, Rong Qi became more and more curious about her, so he tried to sit next to her. After a while, he found that there was no discomfort on his body, and he was delighted. It seemed that his previous speculation was true, and she could really prevent him from getting sick. "I have salt here, I'll give it to you." He took out a small glass bottle from his pocket, which contained snow-white salt particles. Shen Jie glanced at the small bottle he handed over and didn't reach out to pick it up. Instead, she ate the grilled fish in her hand. Rong Qi saw the situation, pursed his lips and smiled, then sat closer to her. Seeing that she didn't refuse much, he hooked his lips and continued, "Your grilled fish is still a bit too hot. It's burnt, isn't this skin a bit bitter to eat? I'm good at grilled fish, should I grill one for you?" After saying that, seeing that she still ignored him, he did not give up, and continued to say, "My name is Rongqi. My parents and brothers and sisters are all soldiers. I am also a soldier. I am 28 this year. How about you? Can you tell me about you?" At this moment, Shen Jie finished the 2-pound grass carp on her hand. She felt her stomach empty, as if she had never eaten it before. She knows this is the reason why she was so hungry in her original body. She picked up the harpoon placed aside again and threw it into the fish pond. Suddenly, the pond was stained with blood again. Looking at the bright red blood floating out of the fish pond, she lightly hooked the corner of her mouth and immediately used the strength of her arm to retract the harpoon, along with a silver carp weighing about 3 pounds. Rong Qi's eyes flashed with surprise, and then he looked at her with a handsome smile on his face as if she was not dragging her feet. Before he could fully appreciate it, suddenly a big fish appeared in front of him. He looked at her with a surprised expression on his face. "Didn't you just say you're good at grilled fish? Give you a chance," she said. Upon hearing this, Rong Qi immediately smiled and took the big fish she handed over, rolled up the sleeves on both sides, and with the other hand, took out a small short knife from her pants to start killing the fish. Shen Jie watched his series of actions with a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Half an hour later, a golden fish with grilled skin was removed from the fire rack. "Try it." He confidently handed the grilled fish to her. Shen Jie didn't say anything. She took the grilled fish from his hand and bit a bit first, instantly feeling like she had tasted a delicious dish from the world. When Rong Qi took her first bite, his deep black eyes stared at her pretty face. After seeing her show a satisfied expression after taking a bite, he knew that the fish he had grilled met her appetite. Chapter 9. Are you lack of money to spend? You are listening at novel.Audio. How about it, isn't it delicious? Do you want to eat my grilled fish every day in the future? If you want, marry me, and I will mainly become my woman. I can make grilled fish for you every day. He only knew that this woman was what he wanted, and since he met her, he would certainly seize the limited time here to kidnap her back. Shen Jie, who was enjoying eating fish, was so scared by his sudden confession that she almost didn't get stuck in the fish bones in her throat. Her face turned red from coughing. Seeing this, Rong-chi anxiously reached out to help her pat her back and said, "Are you okay? Did you get stuck in a fishbone?" Shen Jie pushed away his hand, now afraid to eat, so that this guy wouldn't say anything to make her listen and get stuck in the throat later. "Do you know what you were saying just now?" she looked at him and asked. Rong-chi saw that she finally stopped coughing and glanced at her face again. After seeing that there was nothing wrong, she finally felt at ease and answered her question, "I know. I said whether you want to marry me, I want to marry you." Shen Jie saw that he could still say it again, making sure that the man was not talking nonsense. "I remember we only met twice this time, right? Do you often say such things to female comrades who have only met twice? I've only told you this before. Don't refuse me yet. I've inquired about your situation and you're not doing well at that family. If you marry me, you can go with me to join the army. I'll do whatever you want to live, how about that? Do you want to consider what I just said?" Upon hearing his words, Shen Jie, who had originally intended to refuse, had to ponder and swallowed the refusal that had reached her lips. She had to admit that what he said really moved her. Although she is not afraid of her former good stepmother and stepsister, she does not like to waste time fighting them. In this era, the only way she can leave that family now is to find a man to marry. And the man in front of her is currently her best choice, to have a beautiful face, to have a family background. "I agree, but I made a statement in advance that I won't be at home like other women after marriage. I want to have my own career, and you can't interfere with me." She made a pact with him. Rong-chi nodded eagerly and agreed, "Okay, no problem. I'll agree to any conditions you say." Seeing how readily he agreed, Shen Jie raised her eyebrows. How could she feel like she had fallen into a wolf's den? But now that she has agreed, she has no intention of reneging. "I want to leave that house as soon as possible," she immediately said to him again. "Okay, I'll give the wedding report to the troops when I get back. Don't worry, they know I'm getting married and they just want to agree to this report. I'll come and marry you in 2 days," he said with a smile. After listening to the date he gave, Shen Jie thought for a moment. After 2 days, she could still endure it at that house. "Do you still want to eat fish?" Seeing that she had eaten half a fish in no time, she looked at the fish pond and asked her. Shen Jie felt full in her stomach at this moment and said, "No need, this one is enough for me to eat." Rong-chi nodded and sat closer to her before continuing to ask, "Do you have time tomorrow? Let's go to your city. I heard that when women get married, they have to go around 3 times. I don't need this kind of thing. If you really want to give it, just give me money. The family who bought those things ended up getting cheaper, they didn't deserve it. Are you very short of money to spend now?" He remembered what he had heard from Shen Qing's family before and couldn't help but look at her with heartache. Chapter 10. Is truly the woman he admires. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Jie thought about the situation before her original self. It can be said that her original self was the one who woke up the earliest, slept the latest, did the most, ate the least, and was still a poor person without a penny. She searched through her original memory and found that she had not even saved a single dollar when she was 18 years old. I guess so, it's very scarce. She is now under the control of this money when she wants to do something. Upon hearing this, Rong-chi painfully took out 10 bills of unity and various types from her pocket and stuffed them into her hand. Take the flowers and buy whatever you want. Don't worry, if it's not enough for me to go back, I'll give you my passbook. Shen Jie looked at the money and tickets in her hand, feeling a bit puzzled as she looked at the man in front of her who was suddenly so kind to her. Are you also so kind to other women? Are you giving them money like this? Only you are the woman I have identified with, there are no other women, he replied seriously. Although Shen Jie lived for 2 lifetimes, she did not have the opportunity to date in her previous life. She devoted all her energy to work. Now this confession is her first experience after 2 lifetimes. Damn it, she was a little worried. It's really ridiculous. Thinking about how she didn't panic when facing those gunshots, but when facing this man's confession, she actually panicked. Why do you think of me? We've only met twice, haven't we? She continued with a hint of nervousness in her voice. You're very interesting. At this point, he smiled and immediately said seriously, to be honest, I don't want to be alone for a lifetime. I have a problem with not being able to touch women. When I touch women, I feel itchy all over. I found that after I come into contact with you, there is nothing inappropriate about me. You just make me feel interesting. Shen Jie suddenly felt a bit empty in her heart, and she didn't know what the reason was. All she knew was that after listening to his explanation, the little bit of anticipation in her heart suddenly subsided. If you want to marry me just because you don't get sick when you touch me, I advise you to reconsider. Maybe one day you will meet another woman who won't make you sick. I'm afraid you will regret your decision today, she said calmly. Rong Qi quickly walked up to her and explained, don't worry, this will never happen. Since I have married you, I will naturally be wholeheartedly interested in you, and I am not interested in other women. Shen Jie glanced at his sincere and handsome face, and her heart calmed down a lot. Now she just wants to leave that home. Okay, let's get married. I'll wait for you at home. Also, could you please hurry up? After saying this, she patted the tree debris on her clothes and turned around without looking back and left. Rong Qi looked at her graceful departure, with a slight curl of his lips. She was truly the woman he had set his sights on, and when it came to discussing this matter, he was also generous. Okay, no problem. I'll go to your house tomorrow to propose marriage. Shen Jie, who was walking away, heard his reply and thought for a moment but couldn't look back. She threw another sentence to him, I advise you to bring someone who can suppress my good father and stepmother, otherwise I'm afraid you'll come back in vain. After finishing her meal, Shen Jie thought there would be a tough battle when she returned to this so-called home. However, as she pushed open the rotten door, the few disgusting faces she had anticipated did not appear in the house.